I'm Phil Doherty. Welcome to the Code Authority, the show that's all about standards, codes, inspections, fire prevention, safety materials, and a whole lot more. Code Authority is just one more way that UL Solutions continues to work for a safer world. We are safety science in action here, and today is all about URSIS, that is critical for first responders. And our guest is a perfect guy to talk to us about it. He's Chris Kramer, lead auditor specialist in fire and security services solutions right here at UL Solutions. He represents our company on two NFPA committees, first NFPA 72 and then NFPA 1225. So Chris, thank you very much for being here today.
Bill, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Okay, so we know that URSIS is key for helping first responders communicate when they're in a building or in some place that is somehow not conducive to proper radio communication. So, just first, what exactly is URSIS, and then how and where is it used?
So, URSIS is an enhancement system. It's a life safety tool system for increasing public safety signal inside of a building or structure where the minimum codes are not met. So, any building of that meets the building minimum building codes, or it could be a structure such as a tunnel or fixed guideway.
Okay, so not every place is going to need a URSIS system, just those places that don't already meet the codes.
That's correct. So there are minimum code levels that dictate first responder signal, a public safety signal that is adequate coverage for both volume and clarity so that the first responders can communicate inside the structure or the building. And the URSIS is required when that building or structure does not have that adequate coverage.
Okay, what standards and codes cover these systems?
So they are life safety systems like fire alarm and fire sprinkler systems or any other life safety system in a building. So everything starts in the code world with the building code. The building code specifies which type of building or structure, based on size, use, and occupancy, that determine the need for an URSIS in this particular occasion. And then it points to the fire codes. The fire codes could be NFPA 1, which is the state code here in Florida, or it could be an international fire code or the IFC code, which many other states in the country utilize. From there, the fire codes dictate the installation standards, such as NFPA 1225, as you've referenced, that I'm a technical committee member on representing UL Solutions. And then we also at UL, through our standards and engagement, have UL 2524, which is the equipment standard for URSIS.
Okay, just could you help give me an idea what some of this might actually look like? I'm more of a visual guy here. So the URSA system, what is it exactly? Like if say a building has to get an URSA system installed, is it just like an extra antenna on the roof, or what does some of the equipment actually look like?
Sure. So there's a donor antenna that's installed on the roof on the side of the building that's going to point to a public safety tower that carries the frequencies for the first responders. And then from there, you're going to have what's called backbone cable that's going to go down to the bidirectional amplifier. So the signal booster, the head end equipment that will look similar to like a fire alarm panel box, but maybe a little bit thicker. And from there, it's going to provide the power and distribute the signal out to the service antennas that are going to be located on the floors and in the areas where the public safety signal is weak in that building or structure.
Okay, so just essentially like if you have fire crews going into a building and their radio communications are not going to reach in there naturally, the URSA system makes sure that the guys inside the people or like inside the building can talk to their incident command outside without having to worry about, hey, there's 3 feet of concrete here in this old building and standard radio signal can't get through. URSA helps make sure that they can communicate regardless.
Correct. Because of those model codes, there's going to be permit triggers. So there's going to be testing design for these systems, and then go through the local state code process for permitting. So the design's going to be validated by that permit close.
Okay. Once installed, must Ursus remain operational indefinitely, or are periodic inspections and maintenance needed for these systems?
So the systems have to be maintained operationally um, as long as the signal is still needed in the building. So it's potential in some cases that the signal in the area or the building may no longer need adequate. Yeah, it has adequate signal without the system, so it could be turned off. Or in some cases, due to other buildings being built around it and blocking signal to that donor antenna on the roof that we talked about, it's possible that the system may need to be redesigned and configured. The only way to determine that is through the periodic inspections and the maintenance that's required per code. Building owners have the responsibility, as it's a life safety system, to maintain the system, and they must do so via a service contract with a service contractor that performs that annual inspection. And then there's also a 5 year, much more in depth, thorough inspection that's required. So that service provider is very important. Working with both the public safety and the building owner to ensure that the communication is adequate, strong, the system is working in compliance and is being maintained to how the system was initially permitted and designed for.
Okay, so some things like those inspections might catch, I'm guessing. Like, let's say you had that donor antenna on top of a building, everything's working fine, there's been no change of tier, but after a couple years, there's a lot of other construction and other buildings around that are something much taller. They might block a signal, say, or something like that. Was that the kind of thing that would be caught in those periodic inspections?
That's correct. That's why you do those periodic inspections, because you know the topography of an area is going to change. In dense urban environments where URSA starts to become required or enforced through the model codes, you could see potentially hundreds of systems, located within a 15 square mile radius.
Okay. So UL Solutions, we certify two areas, correct? Like the actual manufacturer of the Ursus equipment, and then the third-party service provider that does the installation. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the
Okay.
the UL 2524 is the equipment standard that the manufacturers have to meet to get their product placed into the building, and that's done through the permitting process um, for the design. From there, uh, we have a service certificate program. So those key service companies or the service providers that we talked about would be the companies that we would list for our certificate program, and then where our program is required, that local listed service company would be able to issue certificates that they are contracted to maintain with building owners.
Okay, what results have we seen where the certification program has actually been required locally?
So a great example would be the city of San Francisco. They began to require our program in 2024, and we started to list service companies to get prepared for the compliance of the buildings that they are contracted for to get listed. So in San Francisco, to current date today, we have listed 17 separate service companies that we validated that they are qualified to service and maintain these systems, that their technicians are appropriately skilled. They have the competency to be able to test and use the test equipment to validate that these systems are performing. And these 17 companies have issued well over 300 certificates in the city of San Francisco. So on an annual basis, we audit the service company as well as those systems that they issue certificates on. So we validate through our third party compliance check the company being listed for them to continue annually to be qualified. We validate them on an annual audit, and then we periodically check on those audits the systems that they certificate to validate that those systems are still operationally compliant.
How long has UL Solutions been doing Ursus certifications anyway?
We've been doing we launched our program in 2022. So we've been at it for 3 years now, and we have some plans in 2026 to go to Canada with our certification program up there.
Okay. You mentioned earlier NFPA 1225, that that's one of the committees that you're on. We could go backwards like that for just a second. Um, if the UL Solutions ERSA certification program is included in the next edition of NFPA 1225, what does that mean for code authorities?
So code authorities, it would be a benefit for code authorities for our program if they were wanting to utilize our service. Um, by having it into the code, they would not have to locally adopt it. So they wouldn't have to write an ordinance, send it to the city commissioners or the county commissioners, whatever agency we're talking about, city or government, whichever government official it is. They would have to get it locally adopted. It'd have to be presented to the council for ratification. The public would have the ability to comment on it. When it's in the code, they can just simply, when they're enforcing the code, point to that code and say, "We're adopting the program because it's in the code."
Yeah. Um, Off the top of your head, what are some of the most common issues that you might encounter that could prevent the certification?
Preventing the certification, such as um, it.
Like an audit turned up something bad, XYZ, or like you were inspecting and went, oh, sorry, this is not going to fly. What are some of those points that might be actually holding up a certification, either on the parts of the service provider or the manufacturer?
So on the service provider side, it could be that they don't have the qualified personnel or the testing equipment to be used. Annually this year, we were in North Carolina and also in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and noticed that a few of the companies their testing calibration equipment had a lapse, so we had to get that addressed right away. On the equipment side, so if we're looking at systems and we're looking at the components in the field, we're looking for that recognized mark that we're talking about. You know, it's the UL trusted mark on the equipment. So if they're using product that does not meet UL 2524 because it's in the building code and also in the fire code and also in the installation standard, that these systems have to incorporate 2524 listed equipment. So that could hold up that system from receiving a certificate because it's not meeting the applicable code and standard.
Okay. Another question here. This type of inspection and these type of systems are critical to save lives, and they're in many buildings and structures that people walk into every day, and they're probably just like not aware that they're there. So, in your position as lead auditor specialist in fire and security services solutions, what does your day to day look like? Like when you come into work, what kind of material are you looking at? What kind of decisions do you make? What is your day like?
So when I'm doing audits or evaluations of listed companies or potentially new work of companies that are looking to be listed, first we're looking at their the paperwork or the data equipment. We're validating that the systems that they intend to certify or they are certified. We're validating that they have all of the requisite documentation that's required. If it's a field day visit and I'm out with the customer, I would start out at the service customer or the service contractor's office, review that information with them, report any findings or any misses or opportunities for them to improve on the documentation. Then we go out to the properties and we perform per the NFPA 1225 code. There's testing requirements for these systems, which the first thing is, you know, a 1 hour battery test. So you disconnect primary power on the system on the BDA, that big red box that's installed downstairs. Um, and then we test the system on its backup battery power for 1 hour. From there, we're doing field testing and checking of the system. The signal performance in the structures. We're certainly looking at critical areas in a building, which would be where the fire department typically sets up their operation for rescue or fire. So stairwells, exit lobbies, elevator lobbies, exit stairwells, and fire command centers if we're in a high-rise structure. And we're really validating that the signal is strong in those particular areas. And then we're checking the wiring, obviously, and checking the penetrations and all of the other things that we would check on any life safety system that we would audit in a building.
Lot of details. That is fascinating stuff. All right, Chris, thank you very much for all your time, your insights today. We really do appreciate it here.
Thank you, Phil. Have a great day. Appreciate the discussion.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Be sure to keep checking out the Code Authority podcast right here. How? Well, there are lots of ways. You can go to YouTube and you can subscribe to our UL Solutions channel. Check out the Code Authority podcast playlist. Look for us on LinkedIn. And of course, check out our website. That's ul.com/the Code Authority. ul.com/the Code Authority. Third time, ul.com/the Code Authority. Thanks a lot. This is the Code Authority, and we will see you back here again soon.
Bye, y'all.